Over the next few minutes, I'm going to share something that is both incredibly simple and profoundly powerful. It's not a hack, it's not a gimmick, it's neuroscience. For the next 48 hours, I want you to talk to yourself differently because how you speak to yourself changes your brain. Literally, the words you say internally are not just thoughts. They are neural signals. And those signals either reinforce the patterns that keep you stuck or they build new circuits that lead to strength, clarity, and transformation. The science is clear. Your brain doesn't know the difference between reality and repeated thought. If you speak to yourself like a confident, disciplined, focused person, your brain begins to believe it, and more importantly, become it. So today, we're not just going to motivate you. We're going to rewire you through deliberate self-talk over a focused 48-hour window, using proven mental strategies that ignite neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change. Your brain rewires based on repeated self-talk. This is not just a motivational idea, it is a scientific fact rooted in the principles of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change and adapt in response to experience, repetition, and focused attention. Every thought you think and every word you say to yourself sends a signal through neural pathways. When you repeat certain thoughts or patterns of speech, those pathways become stronger, more efficient, and more automatic. Just like walking the same path in a field eventually creates a trail, your brain creates mental trails that are easier to follow the more often you use them. When you tell yourself things like, "I'm not good enough, I can't handle this," or "I always fail," you're not just venting. You're programming. Those words create emotional responses, reinforce self-limiting beliefs, and hardwire patterns of anxiety, procrastination, and low confidence into your nervous system. Your subconscious mind doesn't judge what's true or false, it accepts repetition. If you repeat negativity, your subconscious will absorb it as truth, and your behaviors will begin to reflect that internal programming. On the other hand, when you consistently tell yourself, "I am capable, I will figure this out," or "I'm improving every single day," you begin to carve new pathways in your brain. These new neural connections send different signals to your nervous system. You feel more alert, more confident, and more motivated, not because your circumstances have changed, but because your perception of yourself has shifted. Your internal language influences your chemistry. For example, positive self-talk can reduce cortisol, the stress hormone, and increase dopamine, the motivation and reward neurotransmitter. Studies in cognitive neuroscience show that the brain responds strongly to verbal affirmations, especially when spoken aloud with emotional intensity. This activates areas in the prefrontal cortex associated with planning, goal setting, and future thinking. In other words, the more you deliberately speak empowering words to yourself, the more your brain begins to work with you rather than against you. And repetition is key. It's not enough to say something once and expect change. Real rewiring happens through sustained repetition over time. The brain has no choice but to adapt to what is consistent. This is why people can develop both good habits and destructive ones. The brain is neutral, it simply responds to what you feed it. This is why 48 hours of intentional self-talk can be so powerful. It begins to break the loop of automatic, negative thoughts and replace them with conscious, constructive ones. You're not just changing what you think, you're changing how your brain fires and connects. That is the core of rewiring. Even if it feels fake at first, that's normal. The initial discomfort is a sign that you're stepping outside of your old programming. It takes conscious effort to redirect your thoughts. It takes discipline to speak with intention. But every time you do it, you're sending a message to your brain, "This is who I want to be." Over time, your brain gets the message. The old pathways weaken from lack of use, and the new ones grow stronger through repetition and emotion. This process is supported by something called Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together wire together. That means the more you pair certain thoughts with certain emotions, the more those connections become your default state. So when you tell yourself powerful things consistently and back them up with belief, your brain physically restructures itself to support those thoughts. This isn't magic, it's biology. The difference between someone who is mentally strong and someone who feels stuck often comes down to what they repeatedly say to themselves and how often they say it. Identity is built by how you speak to yourself daily. Most people think identity is fixed, something you're born with or shaped by external circumstances. But neuroscience and psychology both confirm that identity is fluid and it is constantly being shaped by the dialogue you have with yourself. Every day, you are telling yourself a story about who you are. That story becomes your belief system, and your belief system becomes your behavior. The internal script running in your mind is more powerful than anything others say about you, because it dictates how you see yourself and how you act in the world. When you wake up in the morning and say, "I'm lazy," or "I always mess things up," you're not just expressing a temporary feeling. You're reinforcing an identity. And your brain listens. The more frequently you say those things, the more your mind begins to operate as if they are fact. This internal dialogue becomes your filter. You start to interpret every event in your life through the lens of that identity. If something goes wrong, your brain doesn't say, "That was a one-time mistake." It says, "Of course that happened. That's who I am." That's how self-fulfilling prophecies are created. Your sense of identity influences your behavior, your decisions, and your habits. If you tell yourself you're not a disciplined person, you're far less likely to stick with routines that require effort. But if you consistently tell yourself, "I'm someone who follows through," or "I am becoming more disciplined every day," your brain starts to align your actions with that belief. It's not instant, but the repetition builds internal evidence, and over time your identity starts to shift, not because the world changed, but because you did. What you say to yourself becomes how you see yourself, and how you see yourself determines what you allow yourself to do. People who speak to themselves with strength tend to behave with strength. People who speak to themselves with weakness tend to live in hesitation, fear, and regret. That's not because one person is better than another, it's because one person is reinforcing a different internal identity, and the mind always moves in the direction of its dominant thoughts. Your brain is constantly scanning for patterns. It tries to make sense of your behavior by labeling it. So if you skip a workout and then say, "I'm just lazy," your brain makes a note of that. If you consistently speak that way, your brain doesn't treat it as a random comment, it treats it as a definition. The language you use becomes the label your mind applies. And once a label is applied, the mind starts filtering experiences to support it. But the powerful thing is that the brain also responds just as strongly to positive, intentional identity reinforcement. When you tell yourself daily, "I am resilient, I am a leader, I am someone who makes things happen," your brain registers those words. If you combine them with consistent action, even small wins, your mind begins to associate those behaviors with your identity. It starts to shift the story from "I'm trying to be better" to "This is who I am now." And that shift is what makes change permanent. Speaking to yourself with intention isn't about lying to yourself or pretending to be perfect. It's about programming your brain to recognize your potential rather than just your past. It's about interrupting the old narrative that says you're limited and replacing it with one that says you're evolving. The more often you do this, the more natural it feels. Over time, those daily self-affirmations, when combined with effort and awareness, start to feel like truth, because your brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's repeated with belief. Positive self-talk activates neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's remarkable ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. It is the very mechanism that allows you to learn new habits, change behaviors, and reframe your thoughts. The way you speak to yourself is not just a psychological practice, it's a neurological event. Every word, especially those you repeat with emotion and frequency, signals the brain to strengthen or weaken specific pathways. When your self-talk is positive, focused, and deliberate, it promotes the growth of healthier, more empowering connections in the brain. The brain is constantly being shaped by experience, and language is one of the most powerful forms of experience it processes. The words you say internally are experiences. When you engage in positive self-talk, such as affirming your abilities, encouraging your efforts, or visualizing success, you are triggering the same systems in the brain responsible for motivation, planning, and emotional regulation. These areas, particularly the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the limbic system, light up during affirming self-talk. Over time, consistent activation of these regions leads to stronger communication between them, which improves your ability to stay focused, handle stress, and take positive action. Research shows that when people use constructive self-talk, their brainwaves change. Positive language can increase alpha and theta brainwave activity, which are associated with calm, focused, and creative states of mind. This is not just a psychological shift, it's a physiological response. It allows the nervous system to move out of chronic stress or survival mode and into a space where learning and adaptation are possible. When you speak to yourself positively, you create an internal environment where your brain feels safe enough to grow and rewire. Neuroplasticity is influenced by three primary factors: repetition, emotional intensity, and focus. Positive self-talk often meets all three. When you repeat a phrase like "I am strong" or "I will overcome this," especially in moments of struggle or determination, you're combining language with emotion and intention. That's a powerful neurological combination. The more emotionally charged the statement, the more likely the brain is to record and reinforce it. And the more often you repeat it with genuine belief, the more those new pathways solidify. Self-talk is one of the most direct ways to influence your autonomic nervous system. Negative self-talk increases sympathetic nervous system activity, your fight or flight response, raising cortisol and other stress hormones. But positive self-talk has the opposite effect. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms the body, slows the heart rate, and allows the brain to operate more clearly. This balance between the mind and body is essential for long-term change. When you calm your body through positive self-talk, you unlock the brain's full capacity to rewire. Another crucial component is that positive self-talk enhances your brain's prediction system. Your brain is constantly predicting outcomes based on past experiences and internal dialogue. If you consistently tell yourself that you fail, your brain prepares for failure. But if you consistently affirm success, effort, growth, and resilience, your brain begins to expect those outcomes. It prepares for them by filtering information, adjusting behavior, and directing attention to things that support your belief. This is not wishful thinking, it's neural alignment. When self-talk becomes intentional and empowering, you are not just changing your mindset, you are shifting the very architecture of your brain. That means every word you say to yourself becomes a tool for transformation. Whether you whisper encouragement in moments of doubt or declare strength when facing adversity, your brain is listening, adapting, and building according to those words. Over time, with enough repetition and emotional connection, this self-talk becomes your mental default, and your brain supports it by reinforcing those circuits. Your subconscious mind believes what you repeat. Unlike the conscious mind, which analyzes, questions, and evaluates, the subconscious absorbs without judgment. It does not differentiate between truth and falsehood, it simply accepts whatever it hears consistently, especially if that message is emotionally charged. This means that the words and phrases you say to yourself over and over again become the foundation of your beliefs, behaviors, and identity. Whether those words are positive or negative, empowering or destructive, the subconscious treats them as programming. The subconscious mind governs about 95% of your daily actions, habits, and decisions. It is the silent engine running in the background, shaping how you react, what you expect, and how you show up in the world. When you repeatedly say things like "I'm not good enough," "nothing ever works out for me," or "I always screw things up," you're not just venting frustration. You're embedding commands into the part of your brain that controls your automatic responses. These commands eventually show up as self-sabotage, hesitation, procrastination, and low self-worth, not because you're weak, but because you've trained your subconscious to believe those things are true. The brain is a predictive organ. It doesn't just react to the present, it anticipates the future based on patterns and past input. So when you feed your subconscious a steady diet of defeatist thoughts, it begins to prepare for failure in advance. You begin to notice more obstacles than opportunities, more threats than solutions. Your attention narrows. Your behavior follows suit. This is how your inner dialogue becomes your outer reality. But the inverse is also true. When you begin to consciously repeat positive, empowering messages to yourself, statements like "I am resilient," "I am capable," "I attract solutions," or "I am evolving every day," your subconscious begins to accept those ideas. With time and repetition, they become familiar, and the subconscious prefers familiarity. It starts aligning your automatic thoughts, emotional responses, and behavior patterns with those affirmations. This is why people who practice affirmations and intentional self-talk begin to notice subtle shifts in how they feel, how they carry themselves, and how they respond to challenges. The language you use doesn't need to be complex. It just needs to be consistent and emotionally grounded. Emotion is the glue that binds repetition to memory. That's why you remember harsh criticisms from years ago or moments when someone praised you deeply. The emotional charge locked those words into your subconscious. The same principle applies when you speak to yourself. If you say something with conviction, especially while visualizing it or feeling it in your body, it sinks deeper. It becomes part of your subconscious blueprint. Visualization can accelerate this process. When you speak empowering words to yourself while also imagining a successful outcome, your brain responds as if it's already happening. Neural circuits light up, reinforcing the connection between thought and behavior. This is why athletes, performers, and high achievers across all fields use affirmations and visualization techniques together. They're training not just their mindset, but their subconscious mind to expect success, to normalize discipline, and to internalize confidence. Reprogramming your subconscious doesn't happen overnight, but every repetition counts. Every time you speak life into yourself, you're carving new grooves into your mental landscape. The old beliefs, even if they've been there for years, begin to weaken through lack of attention. The new beliefs, through deliberate repetition, begin to take root. You start to think differently without trying, act differently without forcing it, and attract different outcomes without chasing them. This shift is not magic, it's the result of reconditioning your inner world, where the subconscious no longer runs on outdated scripts of fear, doubt, or inadequacy, but instead runs on a renewed script of power, clarity, and intention. The tone you use with yourself creates either fear or confidence. Most people underestimate how much the emotional tone of their inner voice impacts the way they feel, perform, and recover. It's not just what you say to yourself, but how you say it. You can say you can do this with strength and calm assurance, and it will motivate you. Or you can say it with a tone of desperation and anxiety, and it will only reinforce doubt. Your nervous system listens not only to your words, but to the emotional energy behind them, and it mirrors that energy throughout your body. When your inner tone is harsh, critical, or aggressive, your brain interprets it as a threat. It doesn't matter if you're not in physical danger, your subconscious can't tell the difference between internal and external threats. So if you talk to yourself like a drill sergeant or a constant critic, your nervous system stays on high alert. You stay in fight or flight mode, which over time erodes clarity, weakens focus, and drains emotional resilience. This leads to a loop where your self-talk actually becomes the source of your stress, anxiety, and hesitation. On the other hand, when you use a calm, assertive, supportive tone, even in moments of stress, you signal to your brain that you are safe and capable. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system, allowing your body to relax, your mind to focus, and your decision-making to improve. Confidence begins with the way you address yourself in difficult situations. The most grounded people aren't those who never feel fear. They're the ones who know how to speak to themselves in a way that neutralizes fear before it takes over. The brain is wired to respond more strongly to emotionally charged communication. When you speak to yourself with fear, panic, or urgency, your brain prioritizes that emotional input and starts to associate it with your tasks, goals, or challenges. That's how you start building anxiety toward things that were never threats in the first place. But when your tone is steady and intentional, your brain associates calmness with your responsibilities. You become more likely to act with clarity, not confusion. I think of the tone you would use to encourage a close friend who is struggling. You wouldn't yell at them, call them weak, or shame them into getting up. You'd speak to them with clarity, with belief, and with emotional steadiness. Yet most people don't give themselves the same treatment. They use a tone with themselves they wouldn't dare use with anyone they love. That disconnect becomes dangerous, because over time, your inner tone becomes your emotional baseline. It's how you begin to feel about yourself on a daily basis, even when nothing is wrong externally. Even simple self-instructions like "let's go, keep moving, we're not stopping now" become powerful when said with a tone of self-leadership. That's the tone your brain and body respond to. It creates a feedback loop, where your voice becomes your source of calm and confidence. The more often you practice this, the more natural it becomes to default to that tone, even under pressure. You start talking to yourself not like a victim of life, but like the commander of your life. And that shift in tone changes how you carry yourself in every room, in every task, and in every challenge. Your tone also affects your memory. Harsh tones are linked to traumatic recall and avoidance behaviors. But confident, emotionally safe tones are tied to clearer memory formation and long-term retention. This is why people who are calm under pressure tend to learn from their experiences more effectively. They're not clouded by self-judgment. They speak to themselves in a way that keeps the mind open, not shut down. When your tone builds confidence, it becomes easier to analyze, adjust, and improve. Repetition wires the brain, but identity locks it in. You can repeat affirmations and positive phrases all day long, but if deep down you don't believe that's who you are, your brain will resist the change. The brain is always looking for consistency between your thoughts and your identity. If you say, "I'm confident," but your core self-image still sees you as insecure or unsure, your subconscious will reject the affirmation as false. That's why real transformation doesn't begin with just what you say, it begins with who you decide you are. Identity is the blueprint that your brain uses to decide which thoughts to reinforce and which to ignore. Every time you talk to yourself, you're reinforcing an identity. Most people are unknowingly reinforcing an identity based on past pain, failure, or fear. They talk to themselves like someone who's broken, someone who's behind, someone who never gets it right. That language creates a feedback loop. The brain keeps validating that identity by selecting evidence from the past that supports it. It filters reality through that lens. But when you begin to speak to yourself as